naturally, when working with 2D, it tends to be very flat, like because you have two dimensions, essentially. You have the X, which is like left to right. You have the Y, which is up and down. So I think really one of the keys here to get that depth is to explore the C dimension, even though there isn't one. And, the way that I achieve that, especially in this work, like it's really, thinking that this world actually exists and, thinking that there is a third dimension where there is none. By just suggesting that in your drawing, that there is a third dimension goes a long way. This is a good example of that. So when I drew this, I tried to really, push that C depth in both animation and in the design. You can see the road is like really, stretching into the distance. And so with the C dimension, it's basically like from behind the camera and into the distance. And if you can push that, and the more you can push it, the more, sense of depth you can create. So that's one part. And I think that's like the most essential part of creating depth. And that also goes into animation, because I remember like when I started out and I tried to like experiment with depth and creating that C space, I was sort of afraid of scaling stuff. Like I would do like a minimal, motion, but here I just tried to, not hold back and really, scale things really small and have them push and become really big and just really live within that space and be comfortable with that. And I think that's key to creating depth. So the way that I animated this car is actually inspired by something that, I sometimes do with client projects. So if you're working with like a 3D object and you want it to spin towards camera, like sometimes you can get away with just doing like a turntable. And with that, and that's essentially like rendering an object, just spinning in, 360. And with that, you can bring it into After Effects. You can add additional rotation to it, and you can sort of manipulate the speed of the turntable using like a time remap. And that's basically how I did this car. If we like go into the car comp here, you can see how simple it is. It's basically going from point A to point B. So I have both sides. There's another way of doing this. Like you could just have the point A, go a second forward, have point B, and then you can hook up those keyframes to like a slider, like using expressions. But this is just like a quick and dirty way of doing it. Just like dragging out that spin to like something like 10 seconds, so that instead of doing expression work, you can basically just have this comp and do time remapping on it. So you sort of decide what angle you want of the car. So on this comp, you can see that I'm using this time remap to basically, choose when I want the car to be in what position. So it goes from like you're seeing the left side of the car, and then over here, you're supposed to see this side. So basically just having control of the angle of the car.
Okay, so you're controlling the angle of the car with the time remap. That makes sense. How are you handling the actual car moving along the path then?
Right. So I think in this case, it's hooked up to this null. And it's basically super simple. It's a couple of position keyframes and a couple of scale keyframes. And if I know myself, I think that I probably started with the scale, because I know that it's going to be scaled from like 5% and scale up to 100 or something. And then after that, once I have the scale animation, I can easily just like add the position and sort of just go in and decide where the car should be and when. If you take a look at this guy, this is actually just another angle of the car, like from underneath. I felt like I needed like a second angle of the car just before it passes the camera. So if we go back, and that's actually on top of the posterized. So we have the posterized time, remember, with the 12 frames per second. But in order to get this in there, I needed that to be on a 1, like animated on 1 instead of 2. So that's like on top of everything. You can see that's the frame with that second angle of the car just passing.
Just one frame there.
Yeah, and it just works. Like if you play it all together, it just feels like one car just going past.
It's clear you put a lot of thought into the depth of the compositions, and you're thinking about this way more like you're actually filming it, like you're looking through a camera as you're designing these compositions. But that shot specifically with the road didn't have too much camera movement. From that point on, there is a whole lot of camera movement going on. So I'm just curious what you did here to make all of this camera movement so fluid and continue on with this sense of depth that you've established.
Basically just building up everything block by block, just like going at it chronologically just to simplify stuff. It's also kind of similar to what we just talked about with the turntable. So I decided that I had an A position and I had a B position. sort of similar here. So the head was going to have this first position right here. And then moving forward, we're going to end up at this state. And it's as simple as that. It's basically the head is connected to this null with a position and a scale. And I just know that we want to go from here and we want to end up in this position. From there, it's just like deciding on the easing, like making the easing right. So you can see it sort of eases into it, and then it has a quick movement and then leans into it at the end. And from there, like when I have the head movement, I sort of, applying the same technique to each element, because the hand in relation to the head sort of implies where this guy is in space. With just the head and the hands animated, you really get what's going on here. Like just by having these three shapes animated like this, you can sort of feel that there is a camera in this space and it is moving how it is moving, like it's doing this turn. So, by just some simple means, you can get that feeling of the camera traveling. So from there, it's like simply just like building up the different elements. So like once I have the hand and the head, you can sort of build the arms. And once you have that arm, you can sort of duplicate that and apply it to the next hand. So it's very like strategically built up like that, one object at a time.